Hi, it's Searching Sabbath, and this week in my exploration of my church's fundamental beliefs, I've gotten to one of the more controversial ones. Fundamental belief number 6, creation. So I'm going to warn you that first, this video is going to contain some controversial material, and secondly, it's going to be longer than average because there's so much to cover. The Seventh-day Adventist Church's official teaching about creation says God is creator of all things and has revealed in Scripture the authentic account of his creative activity. In 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth and all living things upon the earth, and rested on the Sabbath of that first week. Thus he established the Sabbath as a perpetual memorial of his completed creative work. The first man and woman were made in the image of God as the crowning work of creation, given dominion over the world and charged with the responsibility to care for it. When the world was finished, it was very good, declaring the glory of God. There's a lot to say here, and I'm going to try to focus it on the single controversial issue, which is whether we accept the Genesis creation account literally or not, and whether I do. Now, although Adventists are not fundamentalists, this is one issue where we are pretty fundamentalist. We do accept a literal 6-day creation, and in fact, over recent years, this has become really almost a test of orthodoxy, as a lot of Adventist scientists and science teachers have been defending their right to believe in and to teach a more scientifically grounded view of origins, while the church has been insisting on the literal interpretation of Genesis. On the one hand, I have to say this is troubling to me because I really like science. Now, I'm not a scientist, I don't even understand all that much about it, but I do really trust the scientific method, and I implicitly believe that when we study science, when we study the world, we actually learn more about the world God created. So if that's the case, why, when scientists start studying human origins, do absolutely none of them, except the ones who go in with a particular preconceived agenda that they want to prove, none of them seem to come out with any evidence that supports the literal 6-day Genesis creation story. Instead, they come out with something very different. Now, I realize that the theory of evolution as we currently have it does not answer all possible questions about human origin, but it does fit with the evidence that scientists have found so far, and the Genesis creation story, beautiful as it is, does not fit with the physical evidence. Why is that? If God created the world in this specific way that he tells us in Genesis he did, why doesn't the world itself support that story with evidence? In fact, when you read the Genesis creation story, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, etc., it doesn't read like it's intended to be a scientific account of Earth's origins. It reads like a creation myth. I mean, in other ways, even the most fundamental of fundamentalists don't read the Bible like it's intended to be a science textbook. When we read in Revelation 7 verse 1, after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, we don't take that to mean that the earth is a square with 4 literal corners. We understand that the ancient writers visualized it that way, that our understanding of the earth today is that it is a globe and that science has taught us that, and none of that diminishes the fact that the picture of 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth is a beautiful metaphor. I like metaphors. I'm a writer, a reader, and an English teacher. When I read the Genesis story, I read it as story. I've been watching, as I mentioned earlier, a series of YouTube videos called Grounds for Belief by another Seventh-day Adventist writer, Ed Dickerson, who's been talking about the creation narrative, and I highly recommend checking out his videos. I really appreciate what he's been talking about with the literary purpose and meaning of the story. I absolutely agree that the creation narrative as we have it in Genesis is there to tell the people of Israel what kind of God they worshipped and what people they were supposed to be. I recognize that it's structured in such a way as to show that God is not, as in other creation myths, a nature deity, but rather that God is sovereign and creator of all the forces of nature, the sun and the sea and all the rest. And also to show that, again, unlike other ancient creation myths, the world did not arise out of chaos and disorder, but was planned and peaceful and created by a loving God. What I don't get, and this is kind of a question I've been wanting to ask Ed while watching his videos, is where is there in this beautifully structured literary narrative anything that tells me that I have to take it literally, that I have to read it as a scientific account of when and how and over what period of time the earth was created? Now, I'm not letting people on the other side of the issue off entirely either. I know there are millions of Christians who believe in God and believe that evolution was the process through which God created the earth, and although I have to admit that to me that seems to fit better with the evidence, I realize there are questions it leaves unanswered. If you don't take Genesis literally, how do we picture God creating a peaceful and perfect earth through the violent and bloody process of evolution? How do we understand the concept of a human fall from perfect innocence if humans evolved gradually rather than being created as perfect whole beings. And that, of course, doesn't even touch into the whole Seventh-day Adventist issue of how do we understand the seventh-day Sabbath as having such literal importance if we don't have a 7-day literal creation week. There's a lot of interesting questions here, but one thing I have found, although I haven't found all the answers, is that the Christians who believe in evolution are generally much more open to and willing to discuss some of these issues, as opposed to a lot of creationist Christians who will just shut you down if you try to ask awkward and uncomfortable questions. I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that a lot of creationists, including a lot of Adventists, make themselves sound stupid when they talk about creation and evolution. I mean, I'm not talking about, the hardcore creation scientists here. I don't know enough science to know whether that's good science or not. People tell me it's not, but I'm not in a position to judge. I'm talking about your average believer who tosses out something like, well, if humans evolved from apes, why do we still have apes? As if that's some kind of clinching argument, not realizing that all you're doing is making yourself look incredibly uninformed. I'm also very uncomfortable with the dichotomy that seems to exist in a lot of people's minds, and I see even in a lot of Adventist teaching and writing, where if you believe in God at all, you must believe in a literal 6-day creation week that happened 6,000 years ago, and if you believe in evolution, then you must be an atheist. That doesn't reflect reality at all. There's so much more to say about this, but I do want to finish it by saying that I absolutely believe in creation and in God the Creator. I struggle with the Genesis account and how literally we're supposed to take it, but I absolutely believe that this world, this universe, everything in it, and me were created by God, and that I was created in the image of God. In a way, I'm okay with my doubts and questions about this issue, because for me, this is not a deal-breaker issue when it comes to my faith. I mean, as I've said, I'm not a scientist. A lot of scientific type stuff I have to take on faith anyway. When I look at the world around me with my limited non-scientific knowledge, I don't see a world that appears to have been created in 7 days, 6,000 years ago. But I do see a world that appears to have been designed by a loving, intelligent, creative, all-powerful creator. And I'm really okay with not knowing the specifics of exactly how that happened. I've said that a lot of people are not willing to engage in dialogue around these kind of questions that I find interesting and troubling. So that's one thing that makes me really glad that the aforementioned Ed Dickerson suggested to me that I should make a video posing him some of these questions, and that he could make a video in reply answering them. So here are my questions for you, Ed, and I guess after all this they really boil down to 3. First of all, what is there in this literary narrative here in Genesis 1 that tells us that we need to take it as a literal account of our scientific origins rather than as a powerful and beautiful creation myth? Secondly, and I recognize that the full answer to this would require a scientist or even a team of scientists, but I'd like to know your answer to it. If the Genesis account is literally true, why does the physical world around us contain so much evidence to the contrary? And thirdly, do you think it's necessary to believe in a 6-day creation week in order to believe in a creator God? Well, I'm looking forward to Ed's reply video, and I will link to it here. And I also will continue to live in an uneasy mixture of faith and doubt about this issue and keep asking questions.